The Cul-de-Sac of Marrow Lane. The moving truck arrived at 14 Marrow Lane on the last Saturday of August, 1987, its brakes shrieking like something being butchered. Dennis Halloran stepped out onto the driveway and looked up at the split-level house that would, according to the mortgage papers folded in his jacket pocket, belong to his family for the next 30 years. The paint was the color of old teeth. The lawn was too green. "It's perfect," said Carol behind him, one hand shading her eyes. She was 34, tired around the mouth, but she smiled the way she used to before the layoffs, before the little apartment in the city where the walls sweated and the neighbors screamed. "Isn't it perfect, Den?" "It's ours," Dennis said, which wasn't quite the same thing, but she took his hand anyway. Their daughter Bethany, 9 years old and sullen in the way of children uprooted, sat on the truck's bumper picking at a scab on her knee. She did not think the house was perfect. She thought the lawn looked like it had been painted, and she thought the windows watched, and she did not say any of this because nobody listened to 9-year-olds about anything except what they wanted for dinner. The neighbors came out to greet them within the hour, which Carol found charming and Dennis found strange, because, in his experience, people did not leave their homes to welcome strangers unless they wanted something. They wanted something. The first to arrive was a broad woman named Edith Prewitt, from number 12, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil. She had a face like a well-fed hen and small wet eyes that moved constantly. "Welcome, welcome," she said, pressing the warm dish into Carol's arms. "We're so glad to have young blood on the lane. It's been ages since we had a child on the street." "Ages." "There aren't other kids?" Bethany asked, appearing at her mother's hip. Edith looked down at her, and something flickered behind the small wet eyes. Hunger, Bethany thought later, though at the time she had no word for it. "Not for some time, dear. Not for some time. But now there's you." Edith reached out and touched Bethany's hair, and her fingers were cold as pipes in winter. Such lovely hair. Like corn silk. The casserole, when they ate it that night, amid the boxes and the naked mattresses, tasted of meat neither Dennis nor Carol could identify. Gamey and dark. Bethany refused to eat it, and for once her parents were too exhausted to force the issue. Marrow Lane was a cul-de-sac of 11 houses arranged in a horseshoe around a central island of grass upon which grew a single enormous oak. The oak was old, older than the neighborhood, older than the town. Its trunk was so wide that 3 grown men could not have joined hands around it. Its bark was blackened as if by fire, though no fire had touched it in living memory, and its roots humped up through the grass like the knuckles of a buried giant. Dennis noticed, in the first weeks, certain peculiarities. The neighbors kept no cars in their driveways, though they owned them. The cars stayed in garages, waxed and gleaming, and evidently never driven. The lawns were all impossibly, uniformly green, greener than the water-rationed summer should have allowed. And every evening at dusk, the residents of Marrow Lane emerged from their homes and walked, without speaking, once around the central oak, before returning inside. "It's just their little tradition," Carol said when he mentioned it. She had thrown herself into the neighborhood with the desperation of a woman who had spent 2 years feeling that she belonged nowhere. She joined Edith's Tuesday coffee club. She let old Mr. Vandergriff from number 8 teach her to tend the roses that grew, red and fat and somehow obscene, along every fence on the street. "They're friendly, Den. When was the last time anyone was friendly to us?" They asked me 3 times this week when Bethany's birthday is, so they want to plan something nice. Her birthday's in October. I told them October. Edith wrote it down in a little book. She had a whole page of dates, Carol. Names and dates. Carol laughed and kissed his cheek and told him he'd been reading too much Stephen King. And Dennis, who wanted more than anything to belong the way his wife belonged, let it go. He should not have let it go. Bethany made no friends because there were no children to befriend, but she found company nonetheless. In the second week of September, she discovered a boy sitting in the lower branches of the great oak at dusk, his knees drawn up to his chest. "You're not supposed to be up there," she called. "Mr. Vandergriff says the tree's off-limits to kids." The boy looked down at her. He was perhaps 11, pale, dressed in clothes that seemed out of fashion. A striped shirt with a wide collar, corduroy shorts. "I live here," he said. "No, you don't. There aren't any other kids on the street," Mrs. Prewitt said. The boy smiled, and it was not a happy smile. "Mrs. Prewitt says a lot of things. What's your name?" "Bethany. What's yours?" "Toby." He climbed down, moving through the branches with a strange, careful lightness, as if he weighed almost nothing. Up close, his skin had a grayish cast, and there was dirt worked deep into the creases of his hands, under his fingernails, in the whorls of his ears. He smelled of turned earth. "You should leave," he said. "You and your mom and your dad. Before your birthday." "Why?" Toby looked toward the houses, where lights were coming on behind curtains. "Because of what they do to the birthday kids," he said. "Because of what the tree wants." Then the front door of number 12 opened, and Edith Prewitt's silhouette filled it. When Bethany turned back, Toby was gone, and the branches of the oak did not so much as tremble. She told her parents about Toby that night. Carol said it was wonderful that she'd made a friend, and that imaginary friends were perfectly healthy at her age. Dennis said nothing, but he did not sleep well. In the small hours he stood at Bethany's window, looking down at the black oak, and he could have sworn, though he told himself it was a trick of the moonlight, that its branches were arranged into the shape of a reaching hand. The town, when Dennis drove into it, was ordinary in a way that made Marrow Lane seem stranger by comparison. He went to the county records office on a Wednesday while Carol was at coffee club, and told the clerk a lie about researching the history of his property. "Marrow Lane," said the clerk, a young man with a mullet and a name tag reading Greg. "Huh, that's the one out past the old Kettering farm, right? Weird spot." "Weird how?" Greg shrugged. "My grandma used to talk about it. Said the whole neighborhood got built in the 50s on land nobody wanted. There was some kind of, I don't know, cult, I guess? Way back. Before the town was even a town. Settlers who wouldn't join the church. They had this tree they did things around." He pulled a face. "Sacrifices and stuff. Grandma said the ground out there drinks blood and asks for more. Old lady talk. You want the deed history, or what?" Dennis wanted the deed history. The clerk pulled the microfiche and printed the pages, and Dennis sat in his car in the parking lot and read them. And the September sun did nothing to warm him. The house at 14 Marrow Lane had changed hands 11 times since 1954. That was not, in itself, remarkable. What was remarkable was the pattern of it. Each family had owned the house for a period of years, and then the deed transferred, not sold, transferred, without payment, to a new family. And in the margin of one page, some previous researcher had penciled a note, faded almost to nothing. All had children. None do now. Dennis drove home too fast. He nearly hit Mr. Vandergriff, who was standing in the middle of Marrow Lane at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, simply standing there in the road as if he had been waiting. "You've been to town," Vandergriff said through the open window. He was 80 if he was a day, with a face like a dropped apple, and his eyes were the same wet color as Edith's. "You want to be careful, driving so fast. Accidents happen. Children get hurt." He smiled. "Only 2 weeks now. We're all so looking forward to Bethany's birthday." "How do you know her name?" "We know all the children's names," said Vandergriff. "Eventually." Dennis tried to tell Carol that night, after Bethany was in bed. He laid the microfiche printouts on the kitchen table, and he told her about the deed transfers and the penciled note, and what Greg the clerk had said about the tree that drank blood. And he watched his wife's face and saw that he had lost her before he'd started. "You want to leave," she said flatly. "I want us to be safe. We put everything into this house, Dennis. Everything. My father's money. Your severance. There's no going back to the city. There's no—" Her voice cracked. "You said we'd have a home. A real home. And now you want to throw it away because a kid at the records office told you a ghost story? There are no children here, Carol. Doesn't that bother you? 11 families, and every one of them had kids. And now there's just—" "Bethany's imaginary friend told you a bedtime story, and you drove to town and scared yourself. Listen to what you're saying." She swept the printouts off the table. "I finally feel like I belong somewhere, and you want to take it away, because you can't stand for anything to be good. The fight went the way fights go. They said things. They slept back to back. And in the deep of the night, Dennis heard the front doors opening up and down the lane, one by one, and he went to the window and watched the neighbors walk their slow circle around the black oak. All of them, every adult on Marrow Lane, in their nightclothes, faces upturned to the moon. And this time, they were not silent. They were singing, low and wordless, and the sound of it went into Dennis's bones and stayed there. Carol did not wake. Carol, he realized, slept very deeply now. She had, in fact, been sleeping deeply since the second night, since the second casserole, since she had begun taking her coffee every Tuesday with Edith Prewitt. Toby came back the next evening. Bethany found him sitting on the humped roots of the oak, and this time she sat beside him, though the ground there was cold enough to make her shiver. "What do they do to the birthday kids?" she asked. Toby was quiet for a long time. "They put you in the tree," he said finally. "It's hollow inside. There's a way in, down at the bottom, where the roots split. They put you in, and they close it up, and they sing, and the tree—" He stopped. "The tree takes you, bones and all, and then the grass gets green, and the roses get red, and everybody on the lane gets to stay. That's the deal. The tree keeps them the same, never getting old, never getting sick. All it wants is a child every so often, when one of the families has one the right age. That's why there's no other kids. There used to be lots of us." Toby drew his knees up. "I was the last one, before you." Bethany felt her stomach turn over, slow and cold. "You mean you're—" "I've been in the tree 11 years, said Toby, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes were full of dirt, packed solid with black earth. Worms moved in the sockets, and his voice came from somewhere much deeper than a boy's chest. "It doesn't let go all at once, Bethany. It keeps you awake in there, in the dark. In the roots. Forever. The worms writhed. I don't want you to be in here with me, but I don't want to be alone either. That's the terrible thing. Part of me hopes they do it. Part of me is so hungry for someone to talk to. His gray hand closed over hers, cold as a coffin nail. Run, please, before I stop wanting you to. Bethany ran. She ran across the too green grass and past the fat red roses, and she burst into the house screaming. It was her father who caught her. Her father who was already awake, already afraid, already packing. Dennis had decided. Somewhere in the long night of watching his neighbors sing to a tree, he had decided. He would take Bethany and go, tonight. And if Carol would not come, then he would take Carol too. By force if he had to. Because a man does what a man has to do for his family, even when his family does not thank him for it. He packed one suitcase. He took the emergency cash from the coffee can. He went to wake Carol. And Carol was not in the bed. She was in the doorway, and behind her stood Edith Prewitt and Mr. Vandergriff and the rest of them. The whole lane crowded into the upstairs hall in their pale night clothes. Their eyes were all the same wet, gleaming color now, Carol's included, and Dennis understood with a lurch of pure animal horror that the coffee had done something, that the casseroles had done something, that his wife had been walking that slow circle around the oak in her dreams for weeks. "Oh, Den," Carol said, and her voice was gentle and wrong. "You always have to make everything so hard." "Carol." "They explained it to me, at coffee, little by little." She smiled, and her teeth seemed too many. "It's a gift, Dennis. Do you understand what they're offering us? We never age. We never die. We never lose the house. Never lose each other. The city almost killed us. This place will keep us forever." Tears ran down her face even as she smiled. "All it costs is one thing. One time. And then we're safe. Forever. Don't you want us to be safe?" Behind him, Bethany whimpered. "You'd give them our daughter," Dennis said. "The tree gives her back," Carol whispered. "In a way. She becomes part of the ground that keeps us. Part of the lane. She'll always be here, Den. We'll never really lose her. That's more than the city ever promised us. That's more than life ever promised us." Edith Prewitt stepped forward, and in her hands was the little book, open now. Dennis saw the pages of names and dates going back decades, and at the bottom, the freshest entry in fresh ink. Bethany Halloran. October. "It doesn't have to be October," Edith said sweetly. "The tree is hungry now. It's been so long since it fed. And she's such a lovely girl. Corn silk hair." She reached out. "Come along, dear. It only hurts at the beginning." Dennis moved. He was an ordinary man. A man who had never hit anyone in his life. A man who apologized to furniture he bumped into. But there is a thing that wakes in ordinary men when their children are threatened, and it woke in Dennis Halloran then, and it was not gentle. He drove his fist into Edith Prewitt's face and felt her nose break like a stick of chalk. He grabbed the suitcase and swung it into Vandergriff's head, and the old man went down and did not move right when he landed. He seized Bethany and he shoved through them, through the reaching cold hands, down the stairs. The neighbors came after him in a slow tide, unhurried, because they knew. They knew. There was nowhere to go. Because the oak was in the middle of the cul-de-sac, and the only way out was past the oak. He got as far as the lawn. The ground opened. The humped roots of the oak split apart, with a sound like tearing meat, and from the black wet hollow at its base came a stench of rot and old blood. and turned earth. Roots erupted from the grass all around Dennis's feet, whipping up, wrapping his ankles, and they were strong, impossibly strong and cold, and they pulsed. And he understood that they were not roots at all, but something closer to veins, closer to fingers. "Daddy!" Bethany screamed. He threw her. God forgive him. It was the only thing he could think to do. He threw his daughter clear, toward the mouth of the cul-de-sac, toward the road and the town and the world. He screamed at her to run, 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 and the roots dragged him down through the split in the earth, into the hollow of the tree, into the dark. Bethany ran. The neighbors did not chase her. They stood on the lawn in a ring, faces upturned, and they began to sing. Behind Bethany, the great oak groaned and shuddered and pulled her father down into itself, and she did not look back. She ran down Marrow Lane and out into the night, and she did not stop until the green lawns were far behind her and the streetlights of an ordinary street burned overhead. There she collapsed, sobbing, a 9-year-old girl alone in the dark. A police car found her at dawn. Here is the thing about horror. It has a shape you expect, and then it has a truer shape underneath. The detective who interviewed Bethany Halloran was a kind woman named Sergeant Rosa Delgado, who had seen too much and slept too little. She listened to the girl's story, the tree, the neighbors, the casseroles, the boy named Toby with dirt for eyes, and she made soothing noises. When the girl was asleep, she went out to Marrow Lane with 2 patrol cars and a sick feeling in her gut. Marrow Lane was empty. Not abandoned. Empty. The 11 houses stood open, doors ajar, and inside there was furniture and food in the refrigerators and photographs on the walls. But there were no people. There was no Edith Prewitt, no Mr. Vandergriff. There was no Carol Halloran. There was no Dennis Halloran, and no evidence he had ever been dragged anywhere. No blood, no torn earth. The lawns, Delgado noted, were dead, brown, as if they had not been watered in years. The roses along the fences were black and shriveled, and the great oak in the center of the cul-de-sac was dead too, had been dead for a long time, hollow and lightning-struck, its bark blackened, its branches bare. They cut it open, eventually. It took 3 days and a court order and a crew with chainsaws. When they finally split the trunk, they found what was inside, and 2 of the crew never worked again. Bones. The tree was packed with bones, small ones mostly. The long, thin bones of children, dozens of them, generations of them, tangled together and grown through with roots. Among them were scraps of clothing across 4 decades, a striped shirt with a wide collar, corduroy shorts, and newer bones, an adult skeleton, freshly picked, one hand still clutching the handle of a suitcase. There was no doubt about the identity of the adult skeleton. Dental records confirmed it. The bones belonged to Dennis Halloran. But that was not the twist. That was not the true shape underneath. The true shape was this. When Sergeant Rosa Delgado went back through the county records, the real records, the deep ones, the ones the clerk named Greg would never have thought to pull, she found the death certificate. Dennis Halloran had died in the city 2 years before the family ever moved to Marrow Lane. Heart attack, age 36, in a sweating apartment where the neighbors screamed. Carol had found him on the bathroom floor. There had been no move. There had been no fresh start. There had been a grieving widow and a traumatized little girl, and a house that had stood empty on a dead cul-de-sac since 1954. A hunger in the ground reached out, the way it always reached out, for the broken and the grieving and the desperate to belong. It had reached into Carol's dreams and offered her the one thing she wanted more than life: to never lose anyone again, to keep her family forever, to keep even the husband she had already buried. The tree had given Dennis back to her. That was the deal. That was what the deed transfers had always been. Not families moving in, but the ground calling the grieving home, offering them their dead, returned and warm and walking, in exchange for the living children who came with them. Carol Halloran had moved to Marrow Lane alone with her daughter. And the neighbors, the smiling neighbors with their cold hands and their wet eyes, they had never been alive at all. Only Bethany had been alive. Only Bethany. All along. The man who broke Edith Prewitt's nose, who swung a suitcase, who threw his daughter clear and let the roots take him down into the dark screamin' her name. That man had been dead for 2 years. And he had chosen, in the last moment the tree gave him, to die a second time. To be dragged back down into the bones and the dark and the eternal hungry waiting, rather than let his daughter join him there. Bethany Halloran grew up in the care of an aunt 3 states away. She lived to be an old woman. She never told the story to anyone who believed her, except once, near the very end, to a hospice nurse who held her hand and listened. "The last thing he said," the old woman whispered, her eyes gone milky and far away. "The last thing my father ever said. He said, 'Run,' and I've been running ever since." She squeezed the nurse's hand with the last of her strength. "But I always wondered, all my life I wondered, if he loved me enough to die for me twice." Her voice trailed into the dark. "Then why does he still visit? Why is he always waiting, at the foot of my bed, in the corner of my eye, in the roots under every tree I've ever slept beneath? Corn silk," he says. "Such lovely hair." She died that night, and in the morning the nurse found dirt on the pillow, and a single black oak leaf, and the deep, unmistakable smell of turned earth.